Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we combine alcohol and horror for your entertainment. Today we are making a drinking game for Renfield that was released on April 14th.
The movie was directed by Chris McKay, who is not well known in the horror community, but he has directed some well-known animated works such as the Lego Batman movie, Moral Oral, and Robot Chicken seasons 3 to 5. The writers for the movie were Ryan Ridley, who wrote some episodes of Rick and Morty and Community, and Robert Kirkman, the co-creator of The Invincible and The Walking Dead. So finally, there's a horror connection to Renfield.
Renfield is a soft reboot of the Dracula franchise. This installment, of course, is starring Renfield as him and Dracula move to New Orleans. He is tired of being abused by Dracula, so much so that he is going to group therapy for it. While Renfield learns to live for himself and not Dracula, he encounters a cop that doesn't let anybody push her around. With the help of Renfield's support group and Officer Rebecca Quincy, he learns to stand up to Dracula. But standing up to Dracula may have great consequences.
Just a bit of a forewarning, there may be mild spoilers within the rules themselves, but nothing that'll take you too much out of the movie if it is your first time seeing it. That being said, we won't be doing any drink totals for the rules just because we want to avoid spoilers as much as possible, such as how many deaths there are. But with that being said, let's move on to the rules.
Yep, speaking of deaths, let's start with that as the first rule. And from the trailer alone, you can probably tell that there's going to be a good chunk of deaths in this movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, more than I even expected, to be honest. I didn't expect that much death in this movie, but yeah, there's a lot. Anyways, let's move on to rule number 2. It's whenever a scream, cry, or yell is heard, as always. And I'd say this one probably happens the average amount of times. Nothing stands out, I guess.
Yeah, nothing really stands out in comparison to other movies, I suppose.
Yeah.
So let's move on to rule number 3. Rule number 3 is whenever Renfield eats a bug. And this could happen quite a bit at sometimes.
Yeah.
We say a bug, so sometimes if he eats like a whole wasp's nest, let's say, it could be 5 drinks. So I think this one's going to give us at least a good handful. It should give us probably about 10 or so.
Yeah, might break the double digits, but nothing too crazy or over the top. But a good handful of drinks for sure. But let's move on to rule number 4. It's whenever it cuts to the codependency support group. And I'd say this is kind of where a lot of the comedic scenes come into play. Not only at this place, but a lot of them for sure. And it kind of just shows how seriously Renfield is trying to, I guess, stand up for himself, in a sense.
Stand up for himself. Even you can say fitting into a modern society at this point, because
Yeah.
he's from basically the 1920s, 30s? 1930s,
Yeah,
give or take.
He's an old man, but he doesn't look it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's over 100 years old, so
Yeah.
it's something interesting, especially him having to cope with quite a bit.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it genuinely does help him a lot throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we included it as a rule.
So the next rule is rule number 5, which is whenever Mother Lobo is on screen or mentioned. And this is the big baddie of the movie. Spoilers, maybe, not really.
Probably not too much of a spoiler. I mean, we could have included the rule whenever any of the Lobos were mentioned, but because Mother Lobo is kind of like the head honcho in a sense, we decided just to limit it to her specifically. And even that will give you a decent amount of sips, but again, nothing too crazy.
Certainly.
And speaking about the Lobos, it leads us right into our next rule, which is whenever the Lobo wolf family symbol is seen. It's like a symbol with a wolf on it. I mean, it's not much else to explain about it.
Yeah.
But it can be hard to spot sometimes. A lot of times it's in the background, but it is kicking around. Especially you notice it on Tony Lobo or Terry Lobo.
Tony
Terry
sounds
or
like
Tony.
a gangster name.
Either way, it's on his car. And it's also on like the bags of cocaine that you see throughout.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also in other places that are much more subtle. So just keep that in mind when you're watching.
If you're looking for it, it's probably going to be a little bit easier as well.
That's
which
true,
is kind of nice. So you're welcome for the rules. Anyways, let's move on to the next rule. The next rule is whenever Renfield's narrating the movie, you can take a sip of your drink.
Yeah, and I think now is a good time to tell you that we did make a couple of drinks. This one here that I'm drinking is called the Sidekick Cocktail, and it's obviously inspired because Renfield is like Dracula's sidekick. So if you want to learn how to make this cocktail, go ahead and click up there. It'll be above Alex's head or slightly over, somewhere up there. Go and click there to learn how to make the sidekick cocktail. But anyways, enough on that. Let's move on to the rule number 8. It's whenever Dracula is on screen. And I do think this is probably going to be one of the hardest hitters in terms of rules. Maybe, maybe not. It'll certainly give you a lot of drinks.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is it's only one per scene.
Yes.
So it's not going to hit super, super hard or anything.
That's true.
However, we did need a Nicolas Cage rule. And speaking of Nicolas Cage being the main vampire Dracula, this drink is based on vampires itself. This is called Dracula's Kiss. Since you advertise mine, or you advertise yours, I'll advertise mine.
Absolutely.
Again, click above me for that one.
And yeah, just going a little bit more on Nick Cage in this role, I think he fit the role perfectly, and I don't think him going over the top made it awkward or weird, especially because of the tone of the movie. It was like a horror comedy. So I think he fit that role perfectly, given the vibe of this movie.
Yeah, he didn't try to go super over the top as he has in previous movies, such as Wicker Man.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think he was a good fit for the role.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's move on to a rule involving Dracula and Renfield, which is whenever being under Dracula's control is mentioned. And the underlying message is kind of about abusive relationships, and each relationship is different, which we should mention. So, again, it's people such as Renfield that should reach out and find support, and people that want to genuinely help them out.
Yeah, and you see it in the trailer where Renfield's kind of talking about how he's in a narcissistic relationship, and then it cuts to Dracula barging into the therapy session, and then the support group guide, coach, leader, I don't know what you call him, he kind of says like, oh, this is a little bit more than a narcissistic relationship. It's like, it's along those lines, but it's just, again, kind of, I guess, leads into the comedy aspect of it, but it definitely is a rule that kind of stands out a lot in this movie, given the themes that play.
Yeah, given the context, for sure.
Yeah. But let's move on to the final rule of this drinking game. And we mentioned in the intro about Officer Quincy, so we figured we might as well make a rule dedicated to her. And this is whenever Officer Quincy stands up for herself. And I think it happens a good amount of times once she's introduced, because she's always standing up to different people, like the police force, like Dracula, like random criminals like the Lobo family, and all that kind of stuff.
She has a gun to her head, and she's still saying, no, I'm not backing down. You're like, damn, she's pretty hardcore. Yeah,
exactly. And it's kind of the exact opposite of Renfield in a sense. She's like super powerful, stands her ground, whereas Renfield's like a coward, and he kind of just like, cowards to Dracula and hides in his little cave.
I wouldn't even say that. She has no power. Everyone at the police department kind of disagrees with her.
True. She doesn't
turns their back.
She doesn't have power, but she tries to make it seem like she does because she's standing her ground.
Yeah.
In that sense, she kind of seems powerful, I guess.
Yeah, you could argue that for sure. Well, that does it for the drinking rules. Reminding you again that we don't have totals for the drinking rules, just because this is a newly released movie in theaters. However, that's not going to stop us from speculating, at least a little bit.
Yeah, and honestly, I think this one, it might be a little bit on the low end. Like maybe 3 drinks, a little bit more, maybe 3.5. But the rules that we came up with, honestly, I don't think they're too hard-hitting.
Yeah.
Maybe the ones that we just include for every horror movie, death, scream, cry, and yells, those honestly might be the hardest hitters.
Yeah. And which is kind of weird in saying that, because death usually isn't a heavy hitter. Unless it's like a slasher movie and the main character or the main villain just like kills everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially for, I guess, a non-slasher movie, just like a good old comedy Dracula movie.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect that many deaths, but
yeah, for sure.
It's a refreshing take, we'll say that at the very least.
And I think some of the rules, like, they'll be good enough, like they might give you 10 sips. They might just hit the double digits, like Dracula being on screen, for example. Might be the next hardest hitter, but it's not a hard hitter in any sense of some of our other drinking games where we reach, the 5 drinks per movie type of thing. I think this will certainly be on the lower end.
Yeah, certainly.
Anyways, with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our drinking game on Renfield. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below.
Make sure to like, subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next content coming up, which is featuring the drinking game for Beau is Afraid, along with the drinks for it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying cheers to fears.
fears.